once I got through all of my trauma and I got myself all sorted, I was doing a lot of work just as part of my healing, because originally after my experience, I didn't want to have more children. I didn't want to do that again. So I took your prenatal class when I wasn't even pregnant, just because I wanted to understand birth, because what I had experienced was not birth in any sense of the word. I mean, a baby was born, but that's about it. I think the most important aspect through all of it was mindset, and it was a bit of a strange thing for me to do because I wouldn't have ever thought about hiring even a coach, let alone a mindset coach, but just something inside of me told me to do it, and I did. Um, and that was a huge part of my journey. I asked myself what I truly wanted, because I knew that if I decided not to have more kids because of my experience, then I was giving all the power to those people who had done what they had done to me, and I was letting them make that decision for me, and that was not okay, because those people, they went home at the end of the day, they patted themselves in the back for doing a job well done. You know, they did their job. The mom was alive and baby was alive, and that's all that mattered to them. And they went home and went about their lives and never thought of me again. And like my experience was insignificant to their life. And they didn't even remember me. In fact, I met one of the nurses again, and she did not remember me. So when I sat down and I thought about what I truly wanted, I decided that I did want a second child. I didn't want my daughter to be an only child and to be alone in the world. And so I decided that this was what I was going to do. I was going to do this experience again, but do it completely differently. The first thing I did was I wrote my birth plan before I even got pregnant. And like this was months before I even got pregnant. And I was still pretty hesitant to do it again. I had set up this timeline where I was going to wait until the following year. And then by the end of the prenatal class, which was 3 months long, I decided that I felt ready, and we started trying right away. And then I was pregnant. It was December of last year. And I had my birth plan in place, and it took a while because to get a care provider, because originally I was trying to get a midwife and no one was available. And I tried in like 3 different cities to get a midwife, and no one was available. And then in the end, I manifested my care provider. And he actually called me on the phone and asked me if I would be his patient. Which, like, who does that? And I talked to him on the phone for about half an hour, and he was already facilitating informed consent with me regarding the different tests that he would recommend, like all the blood tests. And so I said yes. I was like, I'm gonna trust this, because I've been working on, at this point I had been working at it for about 6 months. And I just like, you know what, I'm trying to manifest this care provider. This person isn't the person that I wanted, but he's coming to me asking to be my care provider, and he's already providing informed consent. So I'm just going to trust that the universe is giving me what I'm asking for and say yes. So that's how the beginning of my pregnancy started. The whole thing was, it was quite the learning process because I had my birth plan and I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know how to get what I wanted. And I didn't know what he was going to want in terms of not necessarily what I was choosing, but just to make sure that I would be safe and he would be safe, and all of all the boxes were checked and all of the contingencies had been thought about, and what the expectations of the hospital were going to be and the expectations of the health authority were also part of it. So with my birth plan, because my first birth, a lot of the trauma happened because of all of the interventions. For this birth, I did not want any interventions at all. Actually, I didn't want any interventions. And so I said that I didn't want to be induced. I either was going to go into labor on my own, or if I had a medical reason why I shouldn't be pregnant anymore, then I was going to schedule a cesarean. And it was going to be a last-minute planned cesarean. And so this question of induction kept coming up. Because medically that was what they were recommending for me. They don't really recommend cesarean unless you actually need it. They would prefer to do an induction as a first resort. And so even though I said that I did not want any kind of induction, they kept bringing it up. It was mostly that doctor who was bringing it up, but it was other doctors as well that I consulted with. And that was really frustrating because I said from the very beginning that I did not want to be induced, that I was not going to choose that for myself. And so to keep reminding myself that that was what I wanted and that I was the one in charge, and that the things that this was a big one. I needed to believe in myself first and foremost, and I needed to remember what was true. And what was true is that I could have any birth that I wanted, and that the things that these doctors were saying could happen were not necessarily the things that were going to happen. And that's a really important distinction because none of it happened. None of it. Even the things that I was anticipating happening didn't happen. Actually, I did a lot of preventative care during my pregnancy as well, because I have chronic blood pressure. It's pre-existing. It runs in my family. And with my first pregnancy, I had early signs of pre-eclampsia, and then I had postpartum pre-eclampsia. And for this pregnancy, I did a lot of prevention in terms of what my diet was and supplements that I was taking. And I didn't have any signs of pre-eclampsia. I didn't even have edema at all, which I was totally expecting. I was prepared for it, and I was totally expecting that to happen, and it didn't. But yeah, there were challenges. I was diagnosed with gestational diabetes. That was a really tough one. It was incredibly stressful. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to eat. I wasn't eating enough initially, but I had all the tools already in place in the event that it happened. I had articles about gestational diabetes printed off and put in my little pregnancy binder. I knew exactly who to ask and where to go. I bought a course on diet for gestational diabetes, and I had support, like one-on-one support with the top expert in diet for gestational diabetes. I had direct access to her to ask her questions about my own diet and how to keep my gestational diabetes diet controlled, which I successfully did. When I asked the nurse at the GD clinic how many people end up on insulin, she said it was about 50-50. So that's not very good odds. But I was pretty determined that I was not going to end up on medication for this. That would have changed a lot of things about the outcome of my pregnancy. The mindset thing was definitely most important, believing in myself and reminding myself every day that just because they believed that I might end up on insulin, that was not what was true for me. And just because they believed that I should get an induction, that's not what was true for me. And just because they believed that I was going to have a uterine rupture, that's not what was true for me. And just because they believed that I was too old and whatever other reason they believed that I was going to end up with a cesarean anyway, that's not what was true for me. And that never was true for me. I basically manifested, I was working on manifesting this birth for more than a year, from the time when I wrote my first birth plan to the day that she was born. And one of the things that I did was I wrote my birth story in past tense as if it had already happened. And then I made a recording of myself telling my birth story as if it had already happened. And then I listened to this recording at nighttime as I was going off to sleep, and sometimes even while I was sleeping. So I was giving my body this message of how exactly I wanted my birth to go. And I started telling people at the hospital and my doctor, okay, she's going to be born on Monday, so get ready. She's coming on Monday. And I didn't want her to come before then because I needed someone to look after my toddler while I was in the hospital. And I had invited my sister to come stay with us so that she could look after her. And she was going to be arriving on the Saturday. So that's why I decided that I wanted the baby to come on Monday. And I started telling everyone that she was coming on Monday. So then my sister arrived Saturday evening, and Sunday during the day was mostly uneventful. Tony went to work, and then he came home about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I said, okay, let's go to the store because my sister needed to go buy some things for her, just some things she needed while she was here. And it was 4 o'clock. And I felt like my water broke. And we get to the store and I said, I don't mean to alarm you, but I feel like my water may have broken. I'm not sure, but my water may have broken. So then we're wandering around the store and I feel like I'm leaking. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm leaking. And I need to go home, so let's finish shopping as fast as possible because I'm pretty sure that this baby is gonna come pretty soon. So then we get home and probably within the hour the contractions started from when my water broke. And they were pretty they were pretty strong contractions. They were good contractions. Most of the amniotic fluid came out in the first couple hours. So they were really good contractions. And then what I did is I went into my room and I turned off the lights. I just had like this kind of orange comforting light, and I had a playlist of like hypnobirthing songs. I just liked them, so that's what I picked for my music. And I laid in bed and just listened to this music and enjoyed the peace and quiet of my room, and just I guess I don't want to say enjoyed my contractions, but I was having really good contractions, and the way that I got through them is whenever the contraction started and it was feeling really intense, I just imagined my baby already in my arms, and then the pain went away. And then the contraction would subside, and then I was fine until the next contraction, and then I did that again exactly the same way, and I just kept doing that until midnight. That was when I had my first active labor contraction. And like I knew what was happening in my body because I had gone through that prenatal course with you, and I understand the different stages of labor and what was happening in my body and what to expect. So then at midnight, I started to shake, and then I had a really strong contraction, and then I said to myself, okay, I'm in active labor. The shaking is my cervix opening. And so I talked to Tony and I said, call the doula, get her here, call the hospital, tell them like we're having a baby, and also like it's midnight, this baby is coming on Monday. So at that point, the active labor contractions, they were a lot more difficult. Imagining my baby already in my arms, that was no longer working. So I went into the shower and I just stood in the shower with the hot water like pouring straight onto my lower back. And I just stood in the shower laboring like that. For most of it, I got to a point, and this was probably when I was starting to near transition, where the water wasn't feeling good anymore. So then I came out of the shower and I tried to go on my hands and knees on the bed because I was feeling tired after standing for it was like close to 4 hours. I was standing in the shower, and I tried to go on my hands and knees, but the baby was like, no, we want to stay upright. So that wasn't working. So then it was right then where my doula arrived at the house. And so at that point, I just sat upright on the toilet, going through my contractions, and she was helping me to get through them. She was helping me to slow my breath down because as the contraction came, it was really intense. I was shaking, I was breathing really fast. I was questioning why I had done this to myself. Like I was questioning why birth was so painful, like my own existence, how we even exist as a human race. And then as the contractions started to subside, I was like, no, I can do this. This is fine. And then between contractions, I felt completely normal. Like I felt like I wasn't even in labor. It was the strangest thing. But I guess for anyone who's had a physiological birth experience, that they understand that that's normal. That's what's actually normal when it comes to birth. So then at 4 a.m., I had my first pushing contraction. And then actually, I couldn't even talk. I'm pretty sure I was like in my head saying, okay, we need to go to the hospital. And then my doula was like, do you want to go to the hospital or do you want to wait a little bit more? And I was like, no, we need to go right now. And then she was like, okay, Tony, I think it's time to maybe think about going to the hospital. And I was like, no, we need to go right now. And so like they're trying to figure out like, do we have all the stuff in the car? Like, let's get some clothes on Jenni, because I had been in the shower and I didn't have clothes on. And they're just kind of, getting things together. And I asked Tony for my shoes. And then I watched him go out the door. And I was like, where is he going? Where are my shoes? And the doula was like standing there with them in her hand, like in front of me. But yeah, we left for the hospital at 4 a.m. and we got to the hospital at 4:30. And like the car ride was really interesting because I was told it was going to be the worst car ride of my life. The doula gave me a TENS machine to use in the car to make it a little bit more manageable. But the car ride was actually great. When I had the contraction, I used the TENS machine because like they were intense, pushing contractions. And then between contractions, I fell asleep. And Tony was like, is she asleep? Like, what's going on here? So then we got to the hospital and we had to go through the emergency entrance because it was 4 o'clock in the morning. The regular door was not open. And Michelle, like, I was sitting in the wheelchair and the doula was just running down the hallway, and I had my eyes like just shut tight because I was having a contraction. I was like yelling, like screaming so loud. I felt like I was on a roller coaster because I was just like rushing down the hallway screaming. And like it's not the same kind of scream as like a regular scream, but it's very similar to a roller coaster scream. And then we got to the maternity ward and they were ready for me. The nurse that I had was not the best nurse, but that was fine. Like we knew what we were doing. We knew what we wanted. And actually, before we left the house, I said to the doula, I don't want them to do anything to me because I knew that she was going to be born. Like it was imminent. And I knew that they were going to have their checklist, that they were going to have their list of things that they wanted to do when I got there, including continuous monitoring and giving me an IV and antibiotics and all of that. And I knew that she was coming any minute and I didn't need any of those things. So before we left, I said to her, I don't want them to do anything to me. So then when we got there, like my memory of this part is a little bit fuzzy because I was really just focused on my contractions and not really focused on what was happening in the room. But apparently the nurse wanted to do a vaginal exam and we were like, no vaginal exam. She was like, well, I need to do a vaginal exam to see if she's admittable. And the doula said, oh, she's admittable. And then she said, well, I need to do a vaginal exam to see if I need to call the doctor. And the doula said, oh, you should call the doctor. And then, I don't know, I was just standing in the room having my contractions. And then the doula said to me, okay, let's like at home, you were the most comfortable sitting on the toilet. So do you want to go sit on the toilet? And I said, yeah, okay. And so we go into the bathroom and she had like little candles like set up. I don't even know where she found the time to do this, but she had already had the bathroom all set up. It was like she had the lights down and so like I sat in there and then the nurse wanted to check my blood pressure. She tried to check my blood pressure while I was having a contraction. So that wasn't going to work very well. And I think she tried to check it a couple times. And then she wanted to draw blood. And I was like, no, you're not going to. How are you going to draw blood? Like, I'm pushing a baby out right now. How are you going to draw blood? No. Like you can do that later. And I found out later that she wanted to draw blood to check my blood type in case I needed blood in case I was having a C-section. And I was like, no, like I'm pushing the baby out right now. Like, which part of this do you not understand? And then she wanted me to stand up. Oh, she wanted to turn the lights on in the bathroom, which we did not let her do. And then she wanted me to stand up because she had the Doppler in her hand. She wanted to try to find the baby's heart rate, which she could not find because the baby was no longer like up here. The baby was coming out, which she really like, she clearly didn't believe us that I was pushing a baby out. And so I stood up and she tried to find the heart tone and she wasn't able to. And then she left the room. She left the room completely. And the doula said, okay, do you want to sit back down? And I was like, no, like there's no sitting at this point. Like the baby is coming out and I'm going to be standing for this. And then like I pushed. I like 2 pushes and then I just felt something come down. And Tony said, is that the head? And then I was like, okay, I can't catch this baby on my own because originally that was our plan, was for me to catch the baby. And I was like, I'm not gonna be able to catch her because I'm standing now. And they're like, don't worry about that. We're gonna help you. And then I had another contractions and 2 pushes, and she came flying out, and all 3 of us caught her at once. So then I was exhausted, of course, from standing for that whole time. And then I was holding her on my chest and I walked over to the bed. The nurse came back into this room at this point. I think she came in just before the baby came out. So I don't know if she even saw or what she was there for or not there for, but she came back into the room. I had the baby and I walked over to the bed to sit down. You know, you're supposed to have this little rest. You know, your placenta is supposed to take half an hour to come out. No, I had continuous contractions. I never had any break. The baby came out. I kept having contractions. They were not as difficult. They were similar to my early labor contractions, so they were pretty manageable. And like I wasn't really paying attention to what was going on around me. I'm holding my baby, I'm having contractions, and the placenta, I felt the need to push, and then the placenta came flying out, and they're like, okay, it's only been 10 minutes. So the placenta was born 10 minutes after my baby was born. And apparently that is very unusual, according to my doctor. And so then I was laying on the bed and I had my baby and the doctor finally arrived. Oh, I didn't tell you this part. So like the placenta came flying out and it was like right on the edge of the bed, like it was about to fall onto the floor. And then the doula asked the nurse, like, are you gonna catch that? Because it's about to fall on the floor. And Tony said that there was like a sheet draped over me, so maybe she couldn't even see that the placenta was there. But the nurse wasn't gonna do anything. So then the doula grabbed, there's like a metal bowl. She grabbed it, she did it so fast. She like came flying towards the bed, grabbed the bowl, and then caught the placenta and stopped it from falling on the floor. And she said, I've never caught a placenta before, so thank you for that.
God, I love Michelle.
So that's pretty fun part of the story too. So then afterwards, the doctor finally arrived. Like all of this happened so fast. I got to the hospital at 4:30 and she was born at 5:15. And the placenta was born at 5:25. So then the nurse or the doctor came in and she said, okay, you have a tear and I need to check to see how bad it is because I might have to call the surgeon in. So then she checked and she said, yeah, I need to call the surgeon. And then the OB came in and he was absolutely amazing. He said, oh, like he looked at the tear and he said, okay, I can either repair this here or I can bring you down to the OR and we'll put you under general anesthetic and you'll wake up in 3 hours. And I didn't want to do that, clear, obviously. And so then we quickly made a plan, like how we were gonna deal with this. He wanted to give me antibiotics because of the tear, and fentanyl was one of the options for pain relief. So I said, okay, how about we do this? We'll start an IV, we'll do the antibiotics, we'll do the fentanyl. They also gave me gas, the Entox, I think
Entonox.
it's Entonox. And they gave me Advil too. And they used freezing. But I can tell you getting stitched like that is extremely painful. Even with all of the pain medication that I was on, I could still feel them doing it. But the OB was absolutely amazing. He talked me through what he was doing. He was very empathetic when something was hurting me. He said, "Oh yes, this place is very tender. This really hurts. I'm very sorry. This hurts." You know, like right now I'm just tying the knot. So like he did the first layer of stitches, like I'm just tying the knot right now. It's going to be a little bit more painful. I said, okay, now I need to do the next layer. Okay, now I'm stitching the next layer. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to tie the knot. Okay, now we have to do like the skin part, and this part is going to hurt because the freezing doesn't work on skin apparently. So I could feel him stitching me up, and that was very, very painful. But he was just absolutely amazing. He talked me through exactly what he was doing. He told me when he was done, and it was just like, it was the best OB experience I've ever had in my life. And it was extremely painful stitches.
It just shows you, though, that it's not what happens, it's how you're being treated as it's happening to you.
Yeah. And then there was shift change for the nurse. So the nurse that wasn't very good left. And every nurse I had after that was absolutely lovely. One of them even told me, it was a pleasure looking after you today. And I was like, well, thank you. And like my recovery, even with I had a 3rd-degree tear, and even with the 3rd-degree tear, my recovery was so much easier than with my first birth. I was back to normal pretty much after only 2 weeks. Well, the most important thing for me was really the mindset stuff, and um like believing in yourself, believing you can do it, remembering what's true for you in those really difficult moments, and you will have them. Remembering what 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 you want and what you can have, and the answer is you can have whatever you want. And a big part of mindset is having the right support, uh, because it's really hard to navigate when you're on your own and you don't have that other voice reminding you of those things. And like you, Carly, are really, really good support because, you know, a lot of people, they ask their friends and they ask their family members and they really don't get the answer. Sometimes even their spouse, they ask their spouse and their spouse says, oh, well, you know, you said you would compromise on this thing here. It's like, no, you don't need to compromise. This is your birth. You're the person who's birthing this baby. You're the person who's living with the consequences. You're the person who is literally sacrificing your body for this. And the other person is not, they're not the one who needs to heal physically from this experience or breastfeed the baby and like literally feed them from your body. So you don't need to compromise on any of this stuff. And it's really important to have that right support. And your spouse might not be able to be that support, especially if it's their first baby, because they are just as inexperienced as you are, and they don't have that right education necessarily, and they have different priorities. Like they're going to be really focused on you, and they're not necessarily going to be able to advocate for you. Or maybe they are able to advocate for you. Tony was actually an amazing advocate for me the second time around because we had had such a bad experience. And having that doula there, like I could not have gotten through that active labor without having a doula. And just having that extra support is so important. And sometimes your friends and sometimes your mom isn't going to be the right support for you. So just personally, in my experience, it's better to have the support of someone who is an advocate and someone who is a birth worker and someone who does have that right education, understands the system, understands birth, and understands the physiological aspect of birth, and understands the healthcare system and how the healthcare system can really derail you. And it's actually a really hard thing to achieve, is a birth without interventions. It's very difficult to achieve because the system is set up to foil you at every turn. And our culture is set up to foil you at every turn. And the mom groups and the Facebook groups, they're gonna tell you what they did. It's not necessarily going to be what's right for you or what's best for you. And asking them their experience isn't necessarily going to inform you of what your experience is going to be, because it's so individual. Like, for example, Pitocin. Lots of people love Pitocin. For me, it was horrible. And I wish I had known ahead of time. I wish I had known what I learned in your course before I had my first baby. I have a website. It's called thebirthhousenetwork.com. And it's a directory for privately owned birth suites. So the the idea is that I wanted people to have, like, our system is very very binary. Either you can have a home birth or you can have a hospital birth, and there's nowhere in between. But the truth is that there is an in between, and it's privately owned birth suites, and they do exist. So what I'm trying to do is create a directory of birth suites to make it easier for people who want an out of hospital birth but don't necessarily want to have one in their house because either they don't have the space or they live in a really rural community and they're not close, they want to be closer to a hospital. And the idea is to give them a third option, because in birth, you have every option, and most times only the hospital is the only option that you're presented, and the way that your doctor wants you to birth is the only option that's presented to you. And there's this impression that you don't actually have any choice, when actually you do have choice. It's all optional, and there are alternatives to whatever you're being presented with. Like, for example, I had a previous cesarean, and so, like, in my community, there's actually very little support for VBAC birth. Very few women attempt a VBAC. Most choose a repeat cesarean because it's supposed to be easier and it's supposedly, more convenient and all of these things. And when you go into the local Facebook mom groups and you ask about VBAC, there's a lot of responses that say, oh, I had a repeat cesarean and trust me, it's not as hard the second time around. Well, that's not what the person asked for, was it? They asked for support for VBAC, and you're telling them to go get a repeat cesarean because it's not that bad. Well, I can tell you a VBAC is a billion times better than any cesarean recovery. Come find my website. It's thebirthhousenetwork.com, or you can find me on social media at the Birthhouse Network. I also have my own Facebook group for people to discuss birthing suites or discuss birth, or even if you have a birth related business, you can come and advertise your business with me. That's fine. Like, self-promote away in my group. That's what it's there for. And it's called the Birthhouse Network Community.